Being a child can be a strangely vulnerable time, though you're often too naive to realize it. There's a memory from my early years that I desperately wish I could erase, but it lingers, vivid and unsettling. I must have been around 6 or 7. My parents had enrolled me in a summer program, a day camp for kids my age. I was in the youngest group, just the 6 and 7-year-olds. One afternoon, we were at the playground when a man, older but not quite elderly, sitting on a bench, struck up a conversation with me. I remember his voice, he knew my name. I didn't feel any fear, though. His tone was warm, and he had this friendly demeanor. He offered me a candy, which I ate without hesitation, and even asked if I wanted a push on the swing. I declined, but we kept chatting. My curiosity got the best of me, as it does for kids that age. He told me his name was Robbie, a name that has stuck with me ever since, and mentioned he was friends with my mom. He casually slipped in that she was running late and he'd be taking me home today. I didn't question it. When my counselor called for us to line up by the gate to leave, I just thought it was normal. Later, back at the camp's meeting area where we waited for our parents, I spotted Robbie again. He walked up to one of the counselors, Cal, I think, and said he was picking me up since my mom couldn't make it. I remember Cal looking at me for confirmation. I nodded, and just like that, my name was crossed off the list. Cal high-fived me, and I left with Robbie. I can still recall how he tightly held my hand as we walked. His pace was fast, too fast for my short legs to keep up easily. When we reached his car, he hurried me into the back seat, and everything felt rushed. He got in, locked the doors, and sped out of the parking lot. "Are you taking me home?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, his voice sharp. I noticed something then, yelling. Outside the car, I caught sight of 2 counselors pointing toward us, shouting in the direction of a park supervisor. My heart began to race. Something was wrong. I turned to look out the rear window when, suddenly, Robbie shouted at me, "Get down." His voice, so calm before, now terrified me. I ducked as he demanded, fear twisting in my chest. I began to cry, and at the next red light, I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The child lock was on. He tried to soothe me, saying everything was fine and he was just taking me home, but my mind was racing, and doubts started creeping in. Was I really going home? Time passed. Too much time. The roads weren't familiar anymore. Panic clawed at me. I wanted to throw up. Robbie muttered to himself, over and over, "Oh no, oh no," his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. And then came the sound that made my blood freeze, police sirens. They were right behind us. Robbie's frustration boiled over into an angry scream as he pulled the car over to the side of a quiet street. He muttered something about going along with whatever he said, but it didn't matter. 2 officers rushed toward the car, guns drawn, ordering him to step out with his hands up. He complied immediately, getting cuffed as he lay face down on the pavement. I was shaking when one of the officers stayed with me, trying to calm me down, asking questions. Another patrol car arrived, and with it, my mom. She pulled up in her minivan, her face pale and wet with tears. The moment she stepped out, she rushed to me, hugging me like she'd never let go. It turns out that just as Robbie was leading me away, my mom had shown up to pick me up. Cal told her someone had already taken me, and in a panic, they chased after the car and called the police. One of the camp supervisors had even followed us on the road, which is how the cops found us so quickly. I think about that day often, more than I'd like to. It's a haunting memory, one that gnaws at me when I imagine the unspeakable horrors that might have happened if things had gone any differently. That evening, after an unusually long shift, we finally clocked out much later than usual, thanks to an unexpected surge of customers. As we wrapped up the closing routine and locked up, I planned to hang out with 2 of my coworkers. After we shared a blunt, we decided to grab some food at Wingstop. Everything felt fine. As the clock crept toward 1 a.m., I knew it was time to head home. I also needed to fill up my gas tank, which was running on fumes. I said my goodbyes and drove toward the closest gas station, conveniently just around the corner from work. Despite its proximity, this station had always given me an uneasy feeling, and I usually avoided it. Even late at night, it seemed to draw a strange crowd. There were frequent fights, hit-and-runs, and random people yelling in their cars. The place was notorious for attracting trouble. I pulled up to the pump, and as I stepped out of my car, the hazy feeling from earlier vanished. Reality hit me. Here I was, about to pump gas in the dead of night, with no one else around. Not a single car, not a single person in sight. I turned to grab my wallet from the front seat, and when I stood back up, there he was, a man, seemingly homeless, rummaging through the trash nearby with an oversized white bag. Not the usual kind of bag you'd see for garbage. This one was disturbingly large, and I couldn't make out what was inside. He must have approached without making a sound because I hadn't noticed him before. Startled, I tried to brush it off, sliding my card into the machine while keeping an eye on him. His head was deep inside the trash now, likely searching for recyclables. Just to be sure, I locked my car again, trying not to attract any attention. That's when things took a dark turn. The moment the locking sound echoed through the quiet station, the man jerked his head up sharply and locked eyes with me. He was tall, well over 6 feet, but painfully thin. His skin was marred with injection marks, peeling in some places, and his hair was shaved close to his scalp. Despite his obvious state of addiction, his face still seemed relatively intact. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "They gave me a bag big enough to hold a dead body." For a second, I didn't believe what I'd just heard. My body went cold. He then bent down and lifted a rusty, old children's bike from behind the trash can. As he began to slowly move closer, he added in a low, almost calm voice, "I'm not going to take you. We're not going to take you. Don't look scared, just smile." By now, I was edging back toward my car, my heart racing. I knew I had to act fast. I made a quick dash for the door, jumped in, and hit the gas. As I sped off, I caught a glimpse of another figure, this one standing by a nearby pump, masked, watching the whole scene unfold. His mask covered his nose and mouth, making it impossible to read his expression, but the presence of a second man sent a chill down my spine. I don't know what they had planned, but I'm thankful I didn't stick around to find out. Whatever their intentions were, it felt like I had narrowly escaped something far worse than just a late-night encounter. Be cautious out there. Sometimes, danger hides in the most unexpected places. When I was around 10 years old, my uncle had a secluded property out in Kentucky. It wasn't far from our home in Virginia, just a short drive. My uncle was big into hunting, so his place was deep in the woods, prime hunting territory. He often let my dad bring us there when he wasn't using it. It was like our little retreat from the busyness of suburban life, and we all enjoyed the isolation. Personally, I loved wandering through the woods alone, always fascinated by nature. One evening, as I wandered a bit further into the forest than usual, I began to notice something unsettling: footsteps. They weren't just random rustling sounds. These were steady, deliberate steps, almost as if someone was following me. My instincts kicked in, and I turned in the opposite direction. As I reached the edge of the trees, I caught sight of someone standing there, partially concealed behind a tree. They weren't moving, just watching. I didn't stick around to find out who it was. I bolted back to the house, heart racing. When I got inside, I told my dad that I had the uneasy feeling someone had been observing me. He didn't seem too concerned, just told me to stay within my uncle's property and not stray too far into the woods. I didn't argue. I wasn't about to go back out there anyway. Later that evening, my dad and my younger brothers went out to grab a pizza from a nearby spot. I stayed behind, glued to the TV. I'd spent plenty of time alone in that house, so being on my own didn't bother me. But not long after they left, I heard someone approaching, the distinct creak of footsteps on the porch. Then came a knock at the door. Excited, thinking they'd returned with the pizza already, I rushed to the door. But as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. It didn't seem possible that they could have come back that quickly. "Dad?" I called out through the door. A voice responded, "It's me." Opened the door. But something was off, the voice wasn't my dad's. My heart raced, and I glanced out the window. The darkness outside swallowed up everything. I couldn't make out who was there. "I'll be right back," the voice said. But by then I was frozen, standing by the door, not sure what to do. It wasn't until my family returned much later that I finally moved. I told my dad what had happened, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably just the wind or my imagination. We packed up and left the next morning, but the feeling of being watched in those woods never left me. A few years back, I worked the night shift as a security guard in a somewhat outdated office building. Most nights, I was completely alone, patrolling the empty floors. The building had its quirks, odd creaks and thuds would echo down the hallways, especially during the late hours. But there was one night that truly unsettled me. I was making my rounds like usual, weaving between the cubicles, when I caught the faintest sound of laughter. It seemed to drift from a shadowy corner, a place where no one should have been. I paused, listening intently, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just my mind playing tricks. But the sound, it was unmistakable. Real. Cautiously, I moved toward the source, gripping my flashlight tightly. As I approached, the laughter grew louder, but something about it was wrong. It wasn't lighthearted or friendly. It carried a dark, twisted tone that sent a chill down my spine. When I finally reached the area, there was no one. Just empty chairs, abandoned desks. The laughter stopped just as suddenly as it had started. I searched the entire floor, but I knew it, there was no one else in that building with me. From that night onward, the unsettling sounds became a regular occurrence, but the laughter, that was the worst. It haunted me. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and requested a change in shifts.